Hello and welcome back to the Ain't Dead Yet podcast. We bring to you another special episode today we might as well just formally name him as co-host of the Ain't Dead Yet podcast. This is show number 4 for him. It's a blessing to have him here. Brett Enders with us. Today we're going to talk through a few different things. We're going to reflect a little bit. I think that there's some importance in that. And then we're going to look forward to kind of what's next and what's transpiring as far as Ain't Dead Yet goes. But it's important Brett's here, and I want to take a minute before we start to talk about why. My gratitude for Brett is limitless. We're not sitting here today if it's not for Brett. There is no Ain't Dead Yet podcast. There is no speaking engagements. There is no merch. None of that exists without Brett. And for those of you that don't know the story, a little over a year ago, Brett and I first connected the night I got baptized. It was shortly after that, we were at like an influencer / church gathering, whatever you want to call that.
It's a good way to describe it.
Yeah. And I got uncomfortable and I'd went outside. It just kind of wasn't, I was feeling kind of off. It wasn't really my vibe. So I went outside and started like basically trying to build a fire with 2x4s and some random tools. And I was out there just messing around, trying to burn time. And Brett comes outside and we sit down and we end up talking for 2-3 hours. It's a long conversation. And during that conversation, he'd kind of approached me and said, hey, I need to know more about you because someone who just walks in and says, I'll get baptized right now. Like, I need to know what's behind that. And so I opened up to him and told him the story about my journey. I talked to him about my dad, which at that point was rather recent. It was probably only 2 months old. And Brett looks at me and he's like, dude, you have to do a podcast. And I was like, what? Like, I don't know, man. I've thought about it, but I don't know how to do any of that. And he's like, doesn't matter. He's like, just show up. I'll take care of everything. Like, I'll interview you the first episode. You tell your story. I'll book the studio. All you have to do is show up. And so I kind of had no excuse. I had to show up and I had to do it. And I say all that to say, you've changed my life, dude. And not just because of a podcast. I have a brother now. I have someone who I know I can lean on when I'm struggling, when I'm having a hard time. And I hope you have someone that's the exact same. But I wanted to start this episode off just by giving you your flowers, man. I love you and I appreciate you.
Dude, ditto, man. It's tough to respond to that because I feel so much mutual just love and respect and appreciation for you. And I think you nailed it, man. We met the first time at Natasha's house doing that small group for Thrive, and you just showed up and you had that look in your eye that you get of just like pure determination. And so just seeing you get baptized in the pool that night, there was just something about the way that you were speaking, like the way that you just so confidently spoke in front of all of us before Scott baptized you in the pool. There was just something about you where I was like, I just you know that feeling where like, I just have to get to know this guy because there's whatever secret sauce he's got or whatever his approach is to life. I just want to learn more about it. And I was really consciously choosing out other male friends to hopefully contribute something to my life. I could contribute something to their life. And so when we got that opportunity to chat at the bonfire, it's one of the best conversations I'd ever had. And so as you were giving me this amazing, immaculate vision for ADY, I find that I think a podcast in particular, if you know how to speak and interview people, is a great first step to turn that vision into existence, because really all you have to do is just find a way to record the episodes. And it's an amazing tool to build your personal brand. You get to interview incredible people. You build your network. You build an audience where if you have an audience of people that are listening to you for 60 to 90 minutes, that's so much more valuable than a massive Instagram audience that's following you for your 30-second sound bites or whatever. If someone's like really resonating with your stuff for 90 minutes at a time, that's a core audience that will support you in whatever venture you do. And because you were so well-spoken and you had this really unique talent stack of, like addiction meets like David Goggins meets Christian ethos, that's just a really unique talent stack that I think is going to resonate with a lot of people. So I just knew, I was like, if there's any way I could just help you get that first episode recorded, you'd be off to the races and your fire would be burning so passionately. And I knew it would just turn into something amazing. So the fact that we're sitting here, just about a year after we met, seeing what you've done in a short period of time, the guests that you've interviewed, just the merch, these opportunities, dude, it's so cool for me to see it from a friend perspective. And I'm just excited I just can't wait to see what you're going to accomplish over the next 5 years because it's going to be unbelievable, dude. So thank you for the words and can't wait to dig into it with you today.
Yeah, the way I think of it, man, in life, we all have these pieces that we're built out of.
Yeah.
But sometimes it takes the right people to put the pieces in the right place to actually get where we're supposed to go. And that's how I think of you.
Yes.
I think you helped organize my pieces in order to put me in the direction to tie me to my purpose.
Definitely.
So I'm ultimately grateful for that. And I think I say that and I share that because it's important if you're listening or watching, you need to surround yourself with the right people. Sometimes the right people will also uncover your purpose and what that's going to look like. And so it's important if you're feeling like you're with the wrong people, you're around the wrong people, to step away from that and make sure you get tuned into the right people because they might just uncover your purpose.
Absolutely.
So with all that being said, in reflection, we recorded that first episode, I think it was January, like December, January timeframe. And we didn't release it because I wanted to do Rocky Raccoon and then I wanted to start, rolling episodes after that. And so, I mean, in theory, the podcast has only been going for 10 months, roughly. When I reflect back on that, it's insane to me because what the podcast, I didn't see what the podcast was going to uncover. First episode comes out sometime in February. By March, a close friend of mine, someone else who's in my inner circle, back home in Virginia, reaches out and he's like, "Hey man, would you ever come talk to like my health and PE class about your story? We do a segment every year on addiction and drugs and substances, alcohol, this stuff." And he's like, "Would you ever come talk to this class?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I say that part of the story because you'll see a lot of it is about saying yes. If it's in alignment with your purpose and it's tied to that thing, you have to say yes.
Yes.
And so for me, I remember saying yes. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to go talk to this group of kids. I don't know what I'm going to say or how I'm going to approach it, but we're just going to go do it. And this was April. And so we went back to Virginia, talked to 2 or 3 classes. And I remember being so inspired after that, being like, okay, this is amazing. Like, how can I continue to develop this? And then it was like May, the lady that I was working with to put on these conversations, her name's Nancy Hands, and she's the director of the Partnership for Community Wellness back home. And she's like, "Hey, I talked to some more people and they want to see if you want to come back in the fall." And I'm like, "Yeah, let's do it." And she's like, "All right, it'll probably be like October or something like that. We got to get into the school year." I said, "Okay, that's fine." And so we kept recording the podcast, kept saying, like, stayed focused on that. She was taking the episodes and kind of sharing them with people. And coming up on October, we have this opportunity to go back home again and speak. And it was kind of set up where it was, okay, now we're not doing just 1 or 2 classes. We still did a couple of those, but the majority of it was, we're going to do grades, like at different schools. So it's just funny. And I tell that part of the story, and obviously we'll continue going off of that path, but it doesn't matter where you start. It's just about starting. And if you're in your groove, you're in your purpose, everything else just continues to get revealed.
Yeah.
You just have to like continue pushing forward in it. And so that process of from April to October, if you will, that 6 months, we went to talking to like 20, 30 kids and we'll get into it, but like over 1,000 at one point. And it's just from saying yes, nothing changed. And so I talk about that, or I bring that up again, because if you're in that groove, you can't say no. If you do, you're just running away from what's like trying to be given to you, if that makes sense.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the fact that you got that first opportunity with that guy to go to the 2 classes a month into your podcast, which, right, you were probably doing, maybe like single-digit downloads an episode or something, outside of like your friends and family. But the fact that someone saw that piece of content, that's the power of putting content out on the internet in a really authentic way, is that it's just this vehicle for people to really understand who you are from afar. And if they recognize that you have some type of spark or talent, they're going to want to like bring you into their world, and it's going to lead to these opportunities. So you thoughtfully were like, yes, it's so important to talk to kids, to be able to teach them what I wish I knew at that age. And I think just the opportunity to public speak in general, everyone should take those chances, because it's such a rare skill set and there's magic that comes from it. and you turned it into this unbelievable trip where at one point I was like, is this guy even going to come back? Because he just keeps getting asked to do more speaking engagements. So it was really cool from my perspective to see that.
Yeah, for sure. And I wanted to ask you about this anyways, because even when I was there, we were kind of going back and forth when we could. It was like, hey, this is what's up. I'll send you pictures, trying to tag you and stuff. You were also on the road in a different capacity,
Yeah.
literally. And so we were doing the best we could to keep tabs on everything. But I thought about you a lot when I was there, because I think in life, it's important to aspire to someone else that's ahead of you in different categories and areas and learn from them. And when it came to public speaking, I looked at you. I'm like, because, well, Brett does these events with Meat Mafia, or if someone asks him to be on a panel for Noble or whatever it may be, he can go talk in front of all these people and present himself really well. And I was super stressed because I'm like, my vocabulary isn't like top tier.
Yeah.
It's just me. And I want to develop it, but I also want to remain authentic to myself. I think your vocabulary is authentic to you. And so when I was aspiring or thinking about you, I'm like, okay, do I upgrade my vocabulary? Do I stay authentic? Like, what's the message? How do I present it? And I would just think back to like different conversations we had, and it was inspiring to me because you never corrected my vocabulary the way I talked. You said that you were inspired just off what I said and how you felt.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, if that can connect with him at his level of intelligence, like it should be able to connect with others, right? It doesn't have to be
100%.
said a certain way
Yeah.
to get the message across. And so, you know, as far as all that goes, though, I look to you constantly for that type of growth.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And I genuinely believe, I think you're just as good of a speaker as me, if not better. And the reason why I say that is I remember the first time that I had interviewed you on your podcast, I was like, this guy has serious talent and potential, which is what I thought when we stood out. When I heard you speak to this small little group the night that you got baptized, I was like, this guy clearly has a talent. I heard you give your testimony at church really powerfully, off the cuff. And I think the biggest thing I've learned through doing the podcast is that you say I speak well and have good vocabulary. I was finding that I was overdoing my vocabulary, trying to make myself seem smarter than I really was. And I was realizing that I was misusing words all the time, which actually just makes you sound stupid, right? Because you're trying to beef up your vocabulary for your listener or to make yourself seem smarter for your guest. And then I'd heard a lot of really good public speakers say that they communicate extremely simply, almost in a way that a 5-year-old could understand. And then once I started communicating like that and just getting to the core of what I wanted to say, and also realizing public speaking, way more than your vocabulary is your presence, the comfortability that you're able to elicit out of the audience, and just the emotion that you're able to pull out of them, that stuff matters so much more than your vocabulary too.
I think of David Goggins, right?
100%.
Like, dude is not up there dropping SAT words.
No.
But he arguably, and maybe it's just because of the avenue or the road that we're on, but it seems like the majority of people I talk to that have went through some form of like massive lifestyle transformation, or, you know, whether it's sobriety, weight loss, gut health. I mean, it's endless. Any of those types of adversity, they bring up David Goggins. And so that goes to show you, if the message is strong enough and it resonates, it doesn't matter how you say it. He might rub some people wrong, but that's okay. He's probably, obviously, you know, Jesus would be number one, I would hope.
Yeah.
But I don't know of anyone else in my lifetime that I've heard celebrated more outside of Jesus that like changed people's lives. Like, people always go back to him.
Yeah.
And so I think that's only because he's authentic to himself. Like, he is who he says he is. Like, he's probably running right now and he's probably bleeding from the knee down somewhere, but that's just who he is and what he's doing. You can bank on it. And so I think that being able to resonate with that's important. Like, that person is real. You hear, like, I'm trying to think of other good examples. Theo Vaughn's a good example. He's him. Right? People resonate to him because he is himself.
Yes.
And all Rogan, you know, all these people, Trump, you know, Biden, I mean, whoever you want to call out, but like, because you can tell who's themselves and who isn't, I think it's important that we recognize, like, if you're out there and you're listening, you're like, okay, take this lesson from me. You don't need to be the other person or someone else. You need to be yourself because that's the gift.
Yes.
The gift is in yourself. It's not in someone else or how they portray themselves. So I had to learn that the hard way. And it caused it honestly, a couple of different speeches, I stumbled a little bit because I was trying to put something in there that wasn't me, right? The story stayed the same, but I was trying to add words in that didn't fit who I was.
Yes.
And you could tell, people could tell, they were like, the hell, like it doesn't line up with him at all.
Yeah.
And so if you're out there and you do get into public speaking, the best advice I can give you is just go tell your truth.
Yes.
Like let that roll, and it comes off, I think, a lot less stressful once you realize you don't have to force anything.
Yes.
You can just talk.
That's so well said. It's a good reminder that God made you one of one. There's not a single person that will ever have your combination of genetics, your mindset, the way that you speak, whatever. So it's very cliche to, like you say, be authentic. And I think people hear that and they're like, what does that mean? And I think that everyone probably has some memories or pockets of experiences. Maybe it was like a dinner with a new friend group or whatever, where they really showed up as themselves, or they like didn't put on a mask, and how good that felt and how much that resonates with people. And the more you can kind of lean into that feeling, particularly with public speaking, you're going to be so much more memorable. And I've stumbled over words and sentences and said things that don't make sense all the time. But what I realize is that the audience's memory is so short. They don't care about that at all, because public speaking, the biggest thing is how you make the audience feel. That they actually don't even really remember your words. They just remember Tripp's presence. So I love that, dude. And the fact, I just can't wait to see like what these engagements are going to look like over the next year, because I think this trip for you is such a life-defining moment.
Yeah, I want to be able to put you on a plane. That's why I asked what you have going the 10th through the 17th. I know you have an event that week, but I want to be able to put you on a plane just to come see one and see what you built. Right.
I could probably see one. I could make a trip to see one at least.
Yeah, I think that'd be epic.
That would be epic.
Because for me, like, again, last time when I was home, and you kind of alluded to it, and this isn't to boast or brag, this is to remind you to stay in the groove. We were only supposed to speak like 5 times, maybe 6. We wrapped at 13. That's where we stopped.
Doubled.
Yeah. And it was just like, I just kept saying yes, and probably said yes too much, to be honest with you. There was one day we ripped 4 in a row, and like I learned my lesson though.
Yeah.
I'm like standing up there and I'm like, oh my God, I'm kind of like dizzy, lightheaded. I'm like, okay, this is too much.
Yeah.
I have to be smarter about this. But during that trip too, I never thought that I would have an opportunity to speak to 1,000 people at one time. Like I remember telling you about that, and you're like, dude, what? Like that's insane. And I remember it was at our rival high school, which was the best part. And I grew up hating this high school, like everything about them. And it's so funny now after that opportunity and experience and the way that they handled everything. So I'll just give them a shout out because I think it's important. Shout out to the whole Roanoke Valley, which is, I'm not trying to hurt any feelings, but I also really don't care. There's a school called Lord Botetourt. It's in Botetourt County. It's the next county over. Growing up athletically, we hated them. Like it was like a rival school, just one of those stupid things. Either way, they had caught wind that I was doing these conversations, these speeches in the Roanoke Valley. Their guidance counselor DM'd me on Instagram and was essentially like, hey, will you come talk to us? What's your fee? Like, what days are you available? I know you live in Austin. Like, what does this look like? And I literally had responded back. I was like, well, this is the only day I have left planned on this trip. Like, this is the only day. And she's like, done. Like, it wasn't like a lot of these other schools. It's like, well, can you make this day work at this time and do this and do that? They didn't approach it that way. She's like, that's the day you can do it. That's the day we'll make it happen. We'll come to find out, in Virginia, the school system of the school year is based on 9 weeks, right? You have 4 9 weeks per school year. And at the end of every 9 weeks, you have like finals or exams. There's like a transition period into the next 9 weeks, whatever. It's a big time. It's an important time. Well, that day that I gave her happened to be the last day of the 9 weeks, and it was an early dismissal. Teachers had all these plans already for their students, how they were going to wrap up their classes before they transition to the next chapters, things, all these things. And the principal essentially sent out an email, and he's like, I don't care what you have going on this day. Everybody in the school will be in attendance for this speech. Like they shut it down. And I was like, okay, this is kind of crazy. I walked into the high school. I was like greeted at the door. Like they introduced me to everyone. it was an insane type of experience for me, because before that it was like, it kind of was, I don't want to say halfway done, because I don't want to take shots at anyone. It's not
Yeah.
that. It just wasn't at this level. And then they walked me down in the gym, and I'm looking in the gym, and it's a big gym, and they have like the whole one side. They're like, okay, everyone's going to sit here. But then I look down, and there's like 5, 6 rows of chairs all the way across the gym too. And I'm
Wow.
like, okay, it
This is before anyone was in there?
was empty.
Okay.
And so I'm standing in there, and I'm like, okay, this is about to go down, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is it. Like, do you want this or do you not want this? Right now is the time you have to figure this out. And I'd never done a sound check before, ever. Like, usually it's just like, there was multiple speeches I gave without a mic. The first one that I had a mic, I was awkward. I was like, I don't even know what to do with this thing. It's too far. It's too close.
Yeah, you got to keep it close, otherwise they can't hear you, and then you're going in and out. And now you're doing a sound check.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now I'm doing a sound check, and
Yeah.
and the guy's like in the back room, and he's like, and he's like, I'm like, I don't know, man. I can't tell. You're gonna have to tell me. I don't know what I'm supposed to sound like in here. But it was a crazy experience. And then he comes back out, and he's like, look, when you get started, he's like, when this fills up, the sound is going to change.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, it doesn't sound the same when it's full versus when it's empty, because there's less oxygen. I don't know how to explain it. I'm like, yeah, whatever. He's like, let me know, up or down. So, okay. And he's like, this gym's going to be full. And he told me that moment, and it hit me in the gut for like, I got a little nervous. You know what I mean? Like, I was kind of like,
What's funny is I'm imagining you in that situation and how I would react, and I can actually feel a little bit of nerves in my stomach just thinking about that situation. 'Cause just seeing all the chairs and being like, this is the biggest speaking opportunity I've ever had before. Am I going to show up or not?
yeah. And I knew it's one of those things, and you played sports. Like, when the whistle blows, it don't matter. It don't matter if you're playing in front of 1 or 100,000. The competition's in front of you. It's yourself in that situation. That's how I viewed it. And I started that speech though, and I think this is important too for public speaking. If you have something you're afraid of happening during the speech, just tell the audience. Like, just be straight up with it.
I love that.
There was, they had a corded mic, and so it wasn't cordless, it wasn't wireless. And so I walk a lot when I'm talking.
Yeah.
I'm like moving around, moving my arms, doing all kinds of wild stuff. And I was like, I'm going to trip over this cord. That's all that was going through my head. I wasn't worried about what I was going to say, how I was going to say it. That was already done. That's already been written. I'm like, I'm going to trip over this cord, and it's going to be a nightmare. And I'm pretty clumsy sometimes. Like, it's part of it. So I started the speech off, and I was like, thanks for the introduction. Just a heads up before we even get rolling, there's a really like high likelihood I'm going to trip over this cord and fall. If it happens, I want everyone to clap, and then we're just going to keep it moving.
Did I get them laughing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like cracked them up instantly.
Yeah.
And then it was like, all right, full send. Didn't trip over the cord, but it took my mind off of it though. And so that's some advice. If you're out there and you're worried about something happening, just tell the audience, make light of it. And as soon as they understand it, you don't think about it anymore. It's the same as being vulnerable and carrying shame. That's how I think of it, is like, if you're carrying shame around, you're worried about what everyone else is going to think if they find out, or if this happens, or versus if you just say, hey, this is my flaw. Like, this is what I'm worried about. The pressure comes off of it.
Dude, that's such a good point that I've never consciously thought about around, there is so much power in just owning the actual thing in your mind that's making you nervous and calling that out to the audience, because the audience is all nervous about their own stuff, but a lot of them probably don't have the courage to admit it. So you admitting that as a speaker, it kind of like breaks down this wall a little bit, and it adds connection where it's like, I'm willing to share something with you. And then it makes the audience more open to your message as well. And then it empowers you with confidence.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And that was kind of the experience there. The thing that I need to dial in is all of these have different time limits.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they might be like, all right, you have 53 minutes, or you might have an hour and 45 minutes. So like, all of them were different, and it's hard to condense the story in different ways. So the thing that I think about, and the thing that I always do before I start, it has nothing to do with me, but I just say a prayer, like in my head, to myself, to God. I'm like, God, just speak through me. I don't know what I'm going to say, but if it comes out of my mouth, I know you sent it, right? And I try to just buy that and believe that with all of my heart. because then you're not up there thinking about anything. And for some reason, by doing that, I always look at my watch and it's like 4 minutes before I'm supposed to finish and I can wrap it up. And I'm like, all right, thanks God. Like, appreciate you looking out.
Yeah.
But that's a good thing that helps me. The other thing that I've learned in public speaking is if you have a crowd, you just have to look into the crowd, right? You don't necessarily have to address person by person. If you get caught up in that, that can be tough because then you can get stuck with that person and you can't transition. So I just try to look at like an area, right? And then if contact happens in that area, then I'll address it. But like, I try not to like just look at one person and then one person and then one person, because I feel like that like blocks you out.
Yeah.
Versus just like kind of flowing one way or another. But what I've also learned after watching tape, because Sky actually gave me this feedback on the podcast, and I'm using it for the speeches too. In sports, you watch your film, right? You can see what you did great. You see what you could do better at. You see what you just sucked at. And then you go address it in the next play, right? Or the next opportunity. And so in watching my film, if you will, I'm like, okay, I look down a lot. I have filler words. They're not as bad as they used to be. We've had this conversation. The first episode we ever did, I said, like 7.
Did you?
7 bazillion times. Yeah. And I just kept saying, and it came out like every other word during the first podcast we did. And no one else noticed it. I did though. And it bothered me. I couldn't even listen to the whole first episode. So watch your film. It might be uncomfortable, but watch your film and learn from it. And I think that that's helped me a lot too. Because it's not about changing the story, but you can change like where you elevate your voice, where you dial it back in based off what you're talking about. Like, I think all those things kind of can help you be a better presenter. But I've also never spoken to anyone that wasn't based on a group of youth or children. Like, it was, 9th through 12th graders, sometimes 7th and 8th at the middle schools. And then like the faculty would be in there, but I've never talked to like a corporate event or like all adults. So I'm interested to see how that could carry over.
Yeah.
What that would look like. Is the story, do I just tell my story again? And I think that I'm struggling with that a little bit, right? When I get that first call to go speak to a different crowd, it's like, okay, what needs to be tailored here? What needs to change? And what I'm starting to lean towards in that struggle is nothing. The story exists. God gave it to me to tell that story. I don't need to tailor it to anyone, because again, whether you're talking to one person or 1,000, the goal is the same. Help one. And if you just look at it that way or connect with one, you're going to connect with more than one. But you're not getting wrapped up or overwhelmed in trying to like turn it into something that it wasn't designed to be. And so all of these things are just things that I've learned after each experience. And I'm sure there's a million more things to learn. But I push on anybody. Like, if you get the opportunity to go talk in front of people, go do it. Go put yourself in that discomfort. You'll grow.
Definitely. It's funny that you say this, because a framework that's helped me a lot, especially with the nerves of public speaking, and I still feel it every single time. And there are moments where I'm like, you kind of are in that fight or flight mode, and there is this kind of weak part of the back of my mind that's saying, oh, dude, it would just be so much easier if I was just in the audience right now and didn't have to do this. And then I replace that with the thought of this feeling that you feel, this nervousness, this excitement. It's very comparable to either before a sports game, like you said, or honestly before you get on a roller coaster. I say to myself, if you don't have this feeling in your life, there's something missing. Like, you have to chase this feeling, because if you're chasing this feeling and you're doing things that making you feel like this, that's a sign that you're doing something that's uncommon, or something where you have the opportunity to make a massive impact. That's really where that nervousness and that excitement is coming from. So like, I always rewire myself to focus on the feeling is good. The feeling is good. The feeling is good. I should feel this. And if I don't feel this, I'm playing it way too safe.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's applicable to, basically it's the opposite of a crutch, right? Like, we have crutches because we want to lean into something that gives us a little bit of comfort in that moment. Whereas when you go do something like that, like, that's not comfortable. But as you start and you get into it, those feelings fade. because you get to a point where you're like, whatever, I'm already in it now.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of the pressure also was alleviated for me because of the kids afterwards coming up and having conversations. Like that, I knew I was connecting when they come up and they're crying and telling stories about what's going on in their household and what's going on in their own lives and their uncle or their mom or their dad, or talking about self-harm, like whatever it may be. I knew, I was like, okay, God, I hear you. I'm doing the right thing. This was the point. But there were a couple different times during those speaking engagements where I would get pulled aside beforehand and they'd be like, look, like maybe don't say, like, we've heard your presentation, maybe don't say this part or this word or this thing. And I remember just being like, no. Like, you want the story or like not.
You want the watered down truth or you want the actual truth?
These kids need to hear it real.
Yeah.
I understand that you don't want to say it from an educator's perspective, but I don't care if someone files a lawsuit because I said the word suicide. Like, what? I'll just sit in court all day long and be like, yeah, well, who did I hurt with that? You know? But what was interesting is God showed up in that, because like the one was around suicide. I'd made a comment during one speech about like, no one wakes up one day and wants to jam a needle in their arm. That's not how addiction works. That caused some people like, kind of aggressively. But that is the reality. Like, that is the truth. That is what it looks like. And it's the same thing with suicide. Like, you're crazy if you don't think that these, call it 12 to 18-year-old kids don't struggle with some of this stuff.
Of course they do.
And-
Vapes, porn.
Yeah. Suicidal thoughts,
drugs.
Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah. 100%. So why are we avoiding it? Avoiding it is literally teaching them the opposite of what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
You don't break the stigma by compartmentalizing it and setting it over here and casting it out and judging it. You break the stigma by bringing it into the circle and blowing the walls off of it.
100%.
And so I think, but God showed up because every time someone would ask me to modify or change a word and I said no, and I put an emphasis on that word, like, it was me, for me, it was like God's telling me to focus on that. Like, go against the grain here. And I would do that. And kids would walk up afterwards, right in front of the same people that had something to say. And they'd be like, I've really been struggling with like suicidal thoughts. And I would just look at these people like, yeah, you didn't want me to bring that up. What about this kid? You know what I mean? And that, to me, that was God showing up, saying like, no, you were supposed to lean into that. And so I kept putting an emphasis on that. And you can look at it on the flip side and say, well, the devil's trying to get in the way of your message by giving you these thoughts or insecurities around your story.
Yes.
And it's like, no, like, you're here to tell that part. That's why you're here. And so I don't know. I think that if you're out there and you're going to give a speech and someone's trying to control you, this is why I'll never sell the podcast. Like, no one's going to tell me, like, they're not going to tamper down what I want to say.
Yeah.
Or my guest, for that matter. Like, we're here to tell our truth in hopes that it helps one person. But your truth is going to help more people than your lies ever will.
Definitely.
And so I think that it's important that whoever this podcast decides to align with and work with in the future, that's understood, right? Get behind the message or don't get in. We don't need you to survive. We'll figure out that part.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like, same to anybody else out there talking to anyone, doing whatever they're doing, you have to stay in your groove, right? And you have to talk your message. Don't get bought out of that. It's the same on social media. It's the exact same, actually. You look at influencers. They can be bought. How many people do you see, like, they advertise a different pair of shoes every week? These are my favorite running shoes. I'm like, bro, last week it was New Balance. Now it's Nike. Then it's Brooks. Then it's Hoka. Like, what? It's a lie.
Yeah.
None of them are probably your favorite, because if I see you running around Town Lake, it's probably in a pair of Sauconys or something.
100%.
You know what I mean? So just like, for me, the value that those things might bring isn't worth watering down the message.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so cringe, dude. Harry and I have had our own reflections with that of, when the podcast really started to grow, Me Mafia podcast, you start getting more brand deals and money pushed down your throat, and it's definitely attractive to take it. And we did take some of those deals early, even though the brands didn't feel incredibly aligned, because it was more out of a scarcity of we have to make money to make this work, to keep the lights on. And then every time you do that, you lose a little bit of confidence and self-respect in yourself because you know that there's starting to be chinks and cracks in that vulnerability and authenticity that gravitated people towards you now. And so then Harry and I just made the conscious decision to just wipe all the sponsorships and just be like, dude, just focus on the product of the show. And if you focus on the product of the show being as authentic and raw as possible, the right God or the right sponsors or whatever, the right monetization vehicles will open up. That will feel really good and you'll get rewarded for doing that. And it's a lot easier said than done. Like you're talking about the type of confidence where, say, Google asks you to speak and they give you $50,000. And then right before the speech, you're like, hey, man, actually, you can't say this thing about suicide. You having the conviction to be like, all right, here's the check back. I'll wire you the 50 grand back. I'm not doing this if it's not authentic to my message. And that's way easier said than done. It sounds really good on a podcast, but that's like the type of conviction that I pray to have.
Well, it goes hand in hand with the other conversations we've had over the course of this last year. You're going to get those opportunities to test your faith,
Yes.
right? Your resiliency, your purpose. What are you going to do in that moment? What I've learned, and it's by doing this very uncomfortable thing at times of turning down opportunities to pursue purpose. And I was talking to Brad about this. I know I've talked to you about this, but if you can get to a place where your purpose over pockets, the pockets will fill, right? Just chase the purpose. And it's the same as like that exact experience you're talking about. If Google wants me to come speak and they tell me that right before, like I know I'll hand that check back
100%.
because I know it's on the backside of it. My faith tells me, no, you're good. Just walk out the door and leave all them people standing in that auditorium and you'll be back. You'll connect with them. Your message will get there. Just wasn't meant to happen today. I'm sure there's been times where you think about these profound speakers. I mean, Goggins is a great example. I can promise you, if someone says, hey, you can't curse during your speech, he's going to be like, sorry.
Yeah.
Like, sounds good. See you later. I'm out. So I think that piece alone is important too. Like, you don't have to sell out to be successful. And honestly, a lot of the people that you look around and they've sold out for different brands, their success is capped. Right? Because no one, at some point you stop believing their message because you don't know what it is. Right? You're like, okay, well, is this person really aligned with this brand or that brand? Like, who really is this human? And I think that there's a couple people in the influencer circle that, and you know, I'm talking about, that I do respect, that like, they take brand deals, but they're still themselves. And if they're told to modify their message or change the way that they do things, they walk away from the brand deal.
100%.
And those people, from what I've seen over the last year, 2 years, they've found more success.
Definitely.
Maybe not right now, but it comes.
Yeah, there's this certain like purity and authenticity, and you know what I'm talking about. It's like you start to develop, especially when you're in the space, like this radar for these really unique, authentic brands that you see on social media, whether it's like personal or a group of people versus the people that are bought and paid for, where they might have more followers on paper. They're probably making a lot of money, but there's just this like, it's just kind of like, oh, you sold out, where it's like you see these younger guys where maybe they have 25,000 followers, but the content is really good and they're shooting from the hip. And you're like, I'll bet on these guys all day long. It might take them 5 to 10 years, but eventually God's going to reward them financially for their efforts.
Yeah. And I was listening to Andy Frisella the other morning running, and I can't believe, so I've never listened to his podcast.
That's wild to me.
Ever. Until Monday morning, maybe. And someone who I've told you about before basically was like, you need to listen to this guy. She's like, I listen to him all the time. Like, you need to listen to him. You'll laugh because you guys sound similar and you use a lot of the same words. And I'm listening to him, and it was episode 771. And he's talking about when you start business or you're in entrepreneurship, how do you stay focused on yourself and not concern yourselves like with what other people are doing or how they're getting there. And it was such a great message because he's like, everything that's fake will flame out. He's like, he's like, today's day and age with the internet, like if you have bad product, word's going to get out. It's not like 50 years ago where you could get off on bad product for 50 years. because there wasn't like this instant social media reaction to
Yes.
like, you suck. You
Yes.
know what I mean? And then you have to deal with those
Yes.
repercussions. But he's talking about that, and it started to resonate with me of like, he's basically saying your product always has to come first, whether that's your speaking, your podcast, your protein powder, whatever you're selling, that product has to come first and your customer service has to come with it.
Mm.
Because if it doesn't, the word's going to get out and you're going to lose business. People are going to read those reviews. I mean, I do it when I go to a restaurant.
100%.
If I'm like, all right, hey, Brett, should we go check out this new spot? I'm going to pull it up and look at it. If it's got like, honestly, in Austin, less than 4 stars, I ain't messing with it.
Yeah.
Why would I? And so if your market is competitive and someone goes and looks that up and your reviews are a 3.4, you expect them to want to work with you, right? Or have you come speak or be on their podcast or buy your protein or your bicycle, whatever you're selling? The answer is no, right? And so I think that was a great podcast, and listening to him basically saying like, stop worrying about what anyone else is doing unless it's growing you. Like if you can learn from it and be better from it, do it. But if it's out of envy, right? And you're like, wow, their success is at this level because they took this shortcut. He's like, that's going to flame out.
Yes.
And so I try to take that narrative, if you will, and apply it to what we're doing, like with merch. This sounds stupid. I'm not selling merch to make money. I'm selling merch to feed this beast, right? It's just part of the equation, if you will, or the ingredient list that helps us get to the final product. So I could easily like lean towards cheap material and turn a greater profit, but I don't care about the profit. I want people wearing the shirt or the hat. I might buy a product that's cheaper, but I'm not going to wear it if I don't like the fabric or I don't like the hat. And so for me, it was like, okay, focus on the product, focus on the customer. The right people will buy this, and then the right people will wear this. Because who do you want celebrating your product, right? It's this other conversation around, and I don't mean to go off on a side tangent.
No, keep going.
But it's this other conversation around like, and I don't mean this in a extremely judgmental way, but what's going to carry more weight? Brett wearing my shirt or some guy who never leaves his house, works from home, doesn't exercise, doesn't have community, doesn't have anything wearing my shirt in his house? Like who am I targeting?
Yeah.
So if you want to target a different crowd, like you have to produce a different product. It's the same as honestly protein powder.
100%.
Like you could probably create a product that you could get a greater profit margin on.
Oh, dude, you can optimize for margin all day long.
Yeah.
Even with Noble, it's like I've learned so much with this being my first CPG venture, and you realize how crazy it is behind the scenes and what these manufacturers do and how much deception and greenwashing there is with a lot of products. Like even with colostrum, with Noble, we're interested in doing a colostrum product in 2025. And so we found a really good manufacturer, and the pricing was so much higher than I was expecting. And I was like, dude, why is this pricing so high? I thought it was going to be, I had another quote for like, $10 a tub. Why is yours 45? And he was like, because you can legally call something colostrum if it's the first, second, third, or even fourth milking. Where he's like, what I'm sending you is the best, the most primo first milking colostrum, but these big leading brands are taking the second, third, and fourth milking and labeling it and defrauding their customers. And so you have a decision to make as a founder where you're like, do I want to optimize for margin because I know it's going to get me to that exit and I can get that house and that car, all the things that I identify with? Or am I going to stay true to my values and my principles and play the longer game? I know that my margin is going to be lower, but my customer experience is going to be so much better. And dude, I've had to have a lot of honest reflections on that. You're talking about customer service with Andy Frisella. Dude, I was doing all the customer service for Noble myself. And when we stocked out a product, we were getting 50 to 100 CX tickets a day. And I literally wasn't able to answer all of them because it was just so much for one person. And it was a lot of negativity. It was stress. But it was a good learning lesson for me of, hey, if you were in the reverse, would you buy from Noble again if you had this customer service experience? No, probably not. So you learn a lot from those experiences. But it's a long-winded way. It's a tangent basically saying, I totally support what you're saying. And I just think God rewards those small but big decisions to be like, I'm not going to compromise on merch.
Mhm.
I want to make the merch so good that the customer, they're not just proud of the ADY logo and what it symbolizes, but how nice the material is.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that anything you sell is going to do better if you stay true to like what you really want to hold and believe in.
100%, dude.
I think about Sun Life. Dude, okay. I'm a tight ass, right, with certain things, except for like running, except for like food. But for the longest time of my life, I would have never, I mean, never in a million years paid $20 for a shake or $20 for a bowl. You're out of your mind.
Spit on that price, yeah.
Yeah. I'd be like, I'm not doing that. That's insane. That's stupid. Guess what? I'll eat a $20 bowl every day now, right? And there's a lot of other people that will. And it's because I don't have to wonder what the ingredients are.
Mhm.
I don't have to wonder if they're shit. They're not. They're going to be great ingredients. And I've heard him actually talk about it before where he's like, yeah, I mean, my margin could be way better.
Yeah.
But like I refuse to back off on what we actually sell.
Mhm.
So look at their success. It's massive. That's why they're still growing. That's why things are still happening. And it's because I think that they didn't give into that. And they're not the only example. There's a million of them. But I think that it doesn't matter if you're selling food, protein powder, shirts, boots, hats, speaking, whatever it is. The point of all of what I'm trying to say is just stay authentic to who you are and yourself. And that's the gift.
Yes.
You know, that you can make a quicker buck, but that's not the gift.
Yeah. There's a reason why Jeff Bezos was the richest man in the world and why Amazon is what it is, and his power, literally creating economies out of a single business. We've never seen anything like that before. It's because he was truly the most methodical and obsessive over the customer experience. And the cool thing about Amazon being public is that you have access to all of his shareholder letters. And I think anyone in business, regardless of the industry, should read those shareholder letters, and you realize how maniacal he was about the customer experience. And so Sun Life is a great example of that. It's almost like they've done something so unsustainable that it makes the business sustainable, because you and I are like, yeah, I'll pay $25 for a bowl because I know it's regenerative organic fruit in acai, and it's the best quality protein powder, and there's paleo granola. They don't compromise on anything. And it's so rare to find a business in today's day and age that doesn't compromise on anything.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that we're talking about this because it's going to happen in the next couple months. I feel like that happens with us. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. Every time we have a conversation, we both get presented with opportunities to fall back and like hold our word.
Yeah.
On the conversations that we have.
Yeah.
That's happened a few times. And so I think this conversation is solely happening, and hopefully for someone out there that's listening too, like this is going to pop up soon. What are you going to do with it? Are you going to choose your purpose? Are you going to what you're supposed to do, or are you going to fall like everyone else? And I think that that's what's unique about our relationship. That's why our conversations, like I never take them lightly. I know that there's purpose behind them.
Definitely.
And so, yeah, I have a ton of gratitude for that. But either way, back to the speaking, we have a trip coming up in November back home. Again, not even tied, the original trip, not even tied to the community wellness that I was working with. It was another DM on Instagram, because the other thing that happened is the school that I told you shut everything down, they posted it on their Instagram and people saw it. You know, and they're like, hey, we want you to come. We want you to come. What that allowed, though, was me to reflect back and say, okay, I'm not doing 1 or 2 classes anymore. Like if the school is in session, we're doing the whole school. Like we'll do grades, but no less than 2 grades at a time. And it's because it's standing on business. Why does only your health and PE classes? Okay, so people need to know this too. In Southern Virginia or Southwest Virginia, or maybe the whole state of Virginia, but I know in Southwest Virginia, not the PE and health's not even a requirement for certain grades. Like it's not even a thing anymore. It's like you're allowed to not do that.
That's insane.
So you're not getting, you really think you're going to connect with all of the people that are struggling if you're only talking to health and PE students that selected to be in that? What? That makes no sense. It's probably the opposite if you really think about it. I know if I was deeply struggling or in my deep struggles, I wasn't like, oh man, let's go sign up for an F45 class.
No,
there's no way.
opposite.
Yeah. So like you need to be able, if you want to talk this message, you need to be able to get it to everyone. So shout out to Lord Botetourt again, making that post, it gave me that leverage. So when the conversations came up this time about how like class size and like who to talk to and how all that was going to work, I just literally just handed off what they did. I was like, this is how it's done. They get it. They grasp it. And as a competitive school or another county or another district, what are you going to say to that?
Yeah.
You're like, well, man, like I've got to be able to show up like they did because they're going to make us look bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so they put the pressure on by doing that. And so this time when we go back, it was only supposed to be 1 engagement. Now it's 6, right? It's always happened.
So cool.
The best part though, bro, I didn't even book a return flight because what people forget, that's my hometown. So it's time with my mom. It's time with Tim, my dad. It's time with other family members and other important people in my life. And so now it gives me this reason to go home that isn't tied to me partying or making bad decisions. It's tied to my purpose. And that's been a wonderful blessing in itself. So I didn't even book a return flight. I'm like, we're just going to do it, see what happens. But each of those, because that leverage that was created, all 6 of these engagements, I think the smallest group is going to be like 500-600.
Wow. That's the smallest group.
Yeah.
That's so many people.
Yeah. And so you think about that, how it's grown, 2 engagements, probably talked to 100 kids total, to 13 engagements, we hit 5,000 kids. And now we're going to do 6 engagements and we'll hit 3,000, 3,300, something like that. The goal now has quickly become like, I want to talk to every kid in the Roanoke Valley. And that's the goal. It's that clear cut and simple for me. Every kid needs to hear something of that message. And it's not even the drugs and alcohol always, honestly. Like a lot of kids resonate with the divorce thing. We don't talk enough about that.
No.
But every speech I start now with these kids, I ask one question. I'm like, who in here has ever had an experience with a divorce in the family? And it's every hand, dude. Every single hand in the room goes up. And so instantly you have a connection with them. Because I just say, like, as soon as they raise their hand, I'm like, I raise my hand to us, me too. And you got them because they're like, okay, like he's about to give us some real truth. And so a lot of kids will come up and want to talk about divorce or split homes or trying to understand those dynamics. Kids are smart. A divorced kid, like a kid of a divorced parents, if you will, the biggest or one of the biggest struggles in that I think frustrate the children the most is you're not getting the whole story. You're smart enough to put those pieces together. You're getting half truth over here and half truth over here typically. So you're pissed off all the time because you feel like you're being lied to. And you're like, well, why would they lie to me if I'm not the issue? Right? That's where your head goes as a kid. And so all these kids can resonate with that. And I think that this message has become so much bigger than just drugs or alcohol. It's all things. It's divorce, it's food, it's drugs, it's alcohol, it's gambling, it's whatever it needs to be. And it's all rooted back in this one thing for me. Addiction doesn't start with a drug or an alcohol or pornography or whatever. It starts in the moment that like that person doesn't feel good in their own skin. And for a lot of people, that starts in early childhood. And so they gravitate to the things that make them feel better or comfortable in their own skin. Unfortunately, some of the things that are easiest to access to get that feeling are the things that create these addictions, right? And I think that, the porn thing, I was told not to really bring that up, right? But I did, I'm going to, and I know,
have to.
yeah, like it's part of every, I don't want to say every, it's part of a lot of men's stories on some level. And I bring it up in the story and these young men would come up to me afterwards and like pull me to the side. And I knew what it was. Like a kid will come up and talk to you about drugs all day at this point. But like when it comes, there's such a big stigma around that. They like pull me to the side and they're real quiet and they're like, hey, I think I have this other addiction or problem and I can't stop looking at porn. And I'm like, that's great awareness. First off, it is a problem and you need to stop. Because if you don't, and you know this better than anyone, it just leads to the next fix, the next thing. I don't mean just like porn. I mean, like, if your crutch is, everything is a gateway to the next thing. So porn could lead to alcohol, or it could lead to Jesus,
Mm.
right? Like you
One or
have,
the other.
that's the polarity of it.
Yeah.
Or it could lead to death or Jesus, right? I mean,
Yes.
people will be like, that's extreme. Like, no, not really. If you take a step back and look how all those things trend, eventually those are the places you end up.
Totally.
And so I think being able to share that with kids has been big. The other blessing that I've had back home is we're technically like part of the Bible Belt. And they don't have an issue with me talking my testimony, which is good, because if they did, I wouldn't tell the story. And I think that I tell it a little bit different, and you know this about me. I'm not a Bible thumper. Like, I don't force that on anyone. Like, you're choose what you want at the end of the day on your own free will. What I find brings more people to Christianity than anything, at least people like me, is not forcing on anyone, just saying like, hey, this is what saved me. This is all I know. That's all I had in that moment, and that's what saved my life. And just leave it at that. I don't tell them like, you need to get in church. You need to hit your knees and pray to God. No, this saved my life. Because what happens is people get in these moments or these spirals or these bottoms, and they'll remember stuff like that, right? They'll be like, well, maybe that's the answer. And a lot of times that's what kicks off their story. So it's been a blessing to be able to talk to kids about the God piece and what that means to me. But I even tell them, and this is proof in the pudding, but I'll be like, look, I don't care what you believe in. I'm just going to give you like my version of faith and higher power, which is God. And kids will come up to me afterwards and be like, man, I'm really struggling with the God thing because of how my dad treated my mom, and he used, the Bible as a reason, which is a great perspective, right? It's not ignorant. It's people using it for the wrong things, obviously, but like that kid realizes like he doesn't want that, or she doesn't want that. And so, but if I'm not open with the conversation around it, and I like leave it open for conversation, then that kid's not going to come up and have that conversation. They're going to be like, oh, he's like my dad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's not interested in hearing what I have to say. But once you hear what they have to say, you can validate that. It's like, hey, I get that. I've been there. I know what it's like to question this thing because of experiences in my life. And then you got them, right? They're like, okay, like, well, I'm not alone in this. Like, clearly this is part of the faith. Part of faith is questioning it sometimes.
Absolutely.
And that's okay. I'm maybe not for everybody. I shouldn't generalize it like that. Part of my story in faith has included questioning it at times. Like, is this really real?
I think everyone's has.
Maybe.
Well, I just think about so many of the things that you're talking about, whether it's, addiction, sobriety. God is a great example. Imagine where you and I could be now had we had that strong relationship with Christ, or just planted those seeds. And I think you have the best persuasion strategy, which is not telling anyone what they should do. You're just speaking about how God has shown up in your life and what your relationship with God is like. And I think that's just the best persuasion strategy for any tactic ever, whether it's like nutrition, religion, whatever. Is just speak about your authentic experience, and people will be pulled towards you because of that. Because when these kids are struggling, they're going to say, oh, I really resonated with Tripp. He might have some secret sauce that I don't have. Well, if a guy like this, who's someone I respect, has a great relationship with God, and I'm sitting here and I'm not happy, or I'm depressed, or I'm suicidal, maybe I should check out this whole God thing, because I clearly don't have the answers. That was what pulled me back towards my faith. Was I realized doing the podcast with Meat Mafia was that there was a common theme amongst the men that I respected the most that we were interviewing, is that they all had a relationship with Christ. And so I said, well, if you're so smart, why are you not happy then? If you're this like atheist, or maybe God exists, or, so that was big for me.
Yeah. And to your point, in these moments, like, I've asked myself, like, the most successful man that I've ever met and the best man that I've ever met is deeply rooted in his faith. And I'm like, well, that's enough evidence for me, right? Like, I don't really need anything else, because the proof is in the pudding, if you will.
Yeah.
Like it's there. His success is there. The way he treats people is there. The way people respect him is there.
Mm.
Everything is there. And I want that. I want to create that for myself. And I tried to create it for all these years without that piece, right? Or like not really taking all of it, right? It was just kind of like, okay, yeah, I love God. God's real. But not like leaning into it. And I feel like over the last year or so, really since the baptism, and I've even had spurts in that, which you know about, but I feel like I've leaned into it more than I ever have. And I feel like there's still so much more to grow. Because I still feel like an infant in it,
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways. I don't feel like an infant in my faith as far as like my belief that God's got me. I feel very matured in that relationship, but I can only imagine how much more that will mature once I start to understand more of the book and start to understand like more of the teachings. I think something I struggle with in that, and I've talked to kids about this too. This is like part of my vulnerability. I have to respect the teacher in order to understand the content.
Mm.
And that's flawed
Yeah.
in some ways, right? The Bible is the Bible. It stands on its own.
Yeah.
And I've got to get to that point where, but it does make it easier if you respect the person teaching it.
100%. A perfect example. I don't want to say I went to a big men's group breakfast at a large church in town that I've been going to recently that I love. And I was really excited for the breakfast. And the pastor that just leads their men's group got up to speak. And I thought it was maybe just like a guy who was like part of the congregation, but he was actually the pastor. And then I saw him sit down, and then I just kind of saw like his gut like spilling out outside of his pants. He had like a quarter zip on, and just I know this sounds so judgmental, but when I saw that he didn't keep himself in the shape that I deemed to be acceptable as a man, I noticed that I immediately kind of like lost a degree of respect, or like didn't cling on to the words that I know that I would have had had he kept himself in that shape that I deem acceptable. And so I don't know if that's right or wrong, but I'm just sharing my honest emotion and how I use that as a learning tool for myself, where I'm like, well, if you're going to judge people like that, there's probably people that are judging you, and you better be keeping yourself in shape that you deem to be acceptable.
Yeah, I've had this conversation that you're talking about too, and we're off on a sidetrack, but I'll roll with it.
That's fine.
Around faith. Back home, like there are certain groups that are like, oh, you have a bunch of tattoos, right? You've destroyed your temple. Meanwhile, they're scarfing down a Big Mac.
Yeah.
And I'm like, bro, don't talk to me. Like, look at you.
Watching Pornhub every
Yeah.
single night.
Like, don't talk to me about my tattoos. And a ton of mine, if you know anything about me, are faith-centered.
Mm.
Like, I have the entire 23rd Psalm on my arm. I have the Serenity Prayer. Got multiple crosses. Like, everything is tied back to that for me in some form or fashion. And if anything, I look at it the opposite way. Like, I'm a billboard for God,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, he saved my life. I have his scripture tattooed on me. I have, Mother Teresa on my chest and crosses and all these different things. But people will ask about it and be like, well, how did you get that? Like, what makes you believe in that stuff? And then you get to open that door and have those conversations. Whereas if you push them away by judging them, like, oh my God, his tattoos, he's a sinner,
Yeah.
right? It's like, well, why would I want to talk to you about Jesus?
Yes.
That's not the Jesus that I want to emulate, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that I tell kids that part of the story because it's something I've struggled with so many times of these people, whether it's this group, that group, whatever it is, I don't want to have the same faith as them because I don't think their faith is like, this sounds bad and judgmental, but like what mine is.
Yeah.
Because I believe for me, faith is built in fire.
Mm.
Like it's built in struggle. It's built in adversity. And for some of us, people like me, not everyone, I have to have everything stripped away in order to really lean into my faith.
Mm.
Like it has to be one of the final things remaining. And I've been working hard on that to not be the case, just to lean into it regardless of what's happening. But if it wasn't for everything getting stripped away from me, I would have never been like leaned into it the way that I am now.
Totally.
So
Yeah, you make a really important point because the apostles say to Jesus, what are the two most important commandments? And the first thing is believe and love God with all your heart, or whatever that's the synopsis of the piece of scripture. And then the second thing is to love your neighbor. And so what you're saying is that when you talk about Bible thumpers, there's people that can quote every piece of scripture clear as day, make every logical argument for why Christ is Lord. And then when they go about their day, they're like judging you when their life, they're sinning just as much, if not more than you are. Where the most important thing, in my opinion, more than anything else, and this is scriptural, is to have that deep-seated connection, intimate relationship with the Lord more than anything else, which is what you have.
Yeah. And I think, man, it's almost difficult to talk about because I get a little too fired up around it. So I'll try to like navigate this appropriately or not. But I can't tell you how many different groups that I've been in where I felt like nitpicked, if you will. And then I'm looking around at how these other men or women are living their lives. And I'm like, why would I want to be a part of your group?
100%.
Like, and if you're saying God is this, like, I'm out. I don't want that. It sounds crazy, but like, that's how it made me feel. So I can understand why a kid would feel that way. Like, I've had to battle that. There's still certain things which you know about. I mean, screw it. I'll talk about it openly on here. I don't care. I struggle with some of the religious stance on like gay marriage, right? I go back to love thy neighbor.
Yeah.
If it's one of the two most important commandments, like, then I'll focus on that.
Yeah.
Because people, and maybe this is wrong or crazy or whatever, but like, I believe in my heart and soul that if you're gay or homosexual or whatever those, whatever you want to call that, whatever the proper term is, I just say it that way because I don't mean any harm with it.
Yeah.
But if that's who you are and you're loving everyone around you and you're helping people and you're a believer and you're trying to give, your testimony in other areas to people and bring them closer to God, you're going to heaven in my book.
Yeah.
That's my belief. It's the same, if not different, than the guy who does all of that too, but jerks off every night. That's how I think of it. You mean to tell me that guy's not going to get into heaven and he does all these other great things? Like, no, I don't buy that. And so I think that's the part of it for me that I lean back into is like, okay, you can't, none of us, no one's probably exactly right on all this.
Yeah.
Like we're going to be wrong in something because we are human, and maybe that's the whole point.
I think that's the whole point, is that we're not meant to design to understand everything.
Right. Absolutely.
Which is what faith is, right?
For sure. And when you show up at those pearly gates, I think part of it is God looking at you and saying, like, you stood firm on what you believe to be morally correct and you helped a lot of people.
Yeah.
You're in. That's how I think of it.
Yeah.
I don't think of it as like, you supported gay marriage, so you can't come in. I don't see that.
I don't think.
And if I get there, I'll face that. I'll be like, yeah, I did. Love thy neighbor. Next. You know what I mean? So it's like, again, with faith, I don't believe in casting people out. If you want to bring them to God, you can't push them away. Like, you have to welcome everyone and whatever their beliefs are. And I don't have to agree with them. That's the other piece of this. Like, I don't have to agree with the way you live your life. There's people that preach against those things. I don't agree with how they live their life. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. But I don't judge them in the same capacity. And I think a lot of that has to do with insecurity. It makes people uncomfortable.
Totally.
It's like it makes them feel like, they don't know how to say or behave or act, but that's really a representation of you, not them.
Yeah. You and I have talked about this off camera before, but I love my girlfriend Dana's church in New Jersey called Emergence. It's very similar to Austin Ridge, where they go book by book out of the Bible. Their pastors are great, and their pastor had a great story where there was a younger female couple, probably in like their mid to late 20s, that had just moved to New Jersey, started going to Emergence. They pulled the pastor aside afterwards, and they just said, "Look, like, love the way you teach. We're so happy to be here. We're just curious, like, do you have a place here for people like us?" And the pastor, I think at first thought that they were friends and then realized that they were referring to themselves as like a lesbian couple. And he had one of the best answers that I've ever heard, where I think he just said, he was like, look, our stance is that it biblically says that marriage is reserved for male and female to become one flesh. That's what we believe in as a church. But with that being said, like, I genuinely want you to know this, like, we love you. We're so happy you're here. We accept you. And I think that's probably one of the best answers, where it's, I think you make a great point, where there's a big difference between a gay couple that's doing a lot of good for the world and then this bizarre, almost like satanic wokist ideology that's infiltrating schools. I think those things are actually mutually exclusive, and a lot of people just conflate them as one thing. And it is interesting how much the church, like the wrong churches, just continue to harp on that one piece when there's so many other important lessons from the Bible.
Well, yeah, stereotypes and generalizations kill this country. Kills religion, kills politics, kills everything. Yeah. Because anybody, I believe this wholeheartedly, in religion and politics, anyone who's on the far, far, far end of any of those spectrums, I don't align with.
Yeah.
And that goes for both political parties. That goes for any type of religion. It's like, I think it's okay and it's healthy, and it's actually it's intelligent to be balanced in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
To understand that, like, it can't all be locked in that way.
Yeah.
And I think that we've gotten to a place, though, where we divide based off these things. And I talked about this a little bit with Jimmy on one of the episodes of, like, if you really want to make the world a better place and you really want to serve God in what I believe the capacity he wants us to serve in, then you can't be on the far end of any spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't.
Yeah.
Because you need to be able to connect with all different types of people.
Totally.
Again, though, with that said, that means you're going to have to encounter and associate and help and work with people that don't believe what you believe.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of it. And I think we're at a place as a country, like, people don't gravitate much outside of, like, the circle that they're in when it comes to that sort of thing. And that bothers me a little bit. I think there's so much to learn from everybody.
Mm.
And you can learn honestly from their negative too.
Yes.
It's the same as their positive. And so I think that for us, what's interesting, or I'll speak for me. What's been interesting as far as the development of my faith is I've stopped concerning myself with other people think about my faith, because that only slows me from doing what I think is morally correct.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just all in on that. And I think that's what faith is getting to a place where you're good answering to God.
Yeah.
And as long as you're good answering to God, who am I to be like, no, right? I don't agree with that. I'm not God. I don't know. Like, I don't have all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's something that could also, like, break down some of these stigmas or barriers around faith. It's like, you can go to the same church
mm-hmm.
and you can be best friends with someone, but your beliefs, there's something in there that's different.
Has to be.
Because we're human.
We're humans.
Yeah. And so I think that's important to understand, that we all have differences, and it's okay.
That's okay. It's a great thing. I think you made a really good point, where I think what my faith used to be, and I'm still wrestling with this a little bit, is showing up on Sunday, the congregation, what do those people think about me, fear of judgment, relationship to the pastor, where I think what you're talking about is getting to this point of just, like, pure intimacy with God and Jesus. And that's the most important thing that matters. It's about your relationship with him, and really nothing else matters besides that.
Well, that means you can take a message in any church.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because I've been on the other side of that, where I'm like, I'm not listening to anything he's teaching or she's teaching because of this one thing.
Yes.
That's wrong too.
Yeah.
Morally. Right? And so I had to face that and be like, you know what? It doesn't really work that way, bud. Like, this is about your relationship with God, not your relationship with what the pastor believes. Because he's teaching you a lot that actually is helpful.
Yeah.
And is close to God. But you're choosing to focus on the things that you don't agree with,
mm-hmm.
or, like, how he presents it or she presents it. And so I think that for me, that's been big in my faith. And I talk about all this because I talk about it with kids, like, openly. And I think that I've even gotten some like sideways looks from people that are in leadership roles in these schools when I'm having these conversations with kids. And like people have even told me like, you shouldn't present about God in that open of a way. Like it is a very like straightforward, direct thing. And I'm like, I don't agree.
Don't have me speak then.
Yeah. Like you deliver your message, I'll deliver mine.
Yeah.
And like, if I bring one person to God, then great.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. It's just, but I tell kids that because especially coming from that part of the country, hey, you're not exposed to a whole lot. It's becoming more diverse now than it ever has been. But man, it was like getting beat over the head when I left there and went to Kent State. Like I was like, whoa, I'd never seen any of this stuff. And
Yeah.
like none of it. And it just blew my mind. And the Northeast is very different than the Southeast.
100%.
And so I try to tell kids that though, because like you're only getting a small taste of what's really happening everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't like the taste of what's happening here, just leave.
Yeah.
Like it's that simple. And that's freeing for a kid because a lot of times in these smaller towns, they see themselves as locked in, right? Like I'm going to graduate high school here. I'm going to work at the steel mill or the railroad. Used to be the railroad. They're gone now. Or like whatever these like established companies are. And like, they're not like they're limiting themselves.
Yeah.
And so I'm against the grain in that. I'm like, leave, pack your
Okay.
bags, go live in your car, like whatever, send it. But I think kids want that, right? They want to feel that they have that option. And I think that when they hear from somebody who's done different things like that, it just empowers them to want to be better or do more. And so I just try to be real with them. And I think the kids' feedback to the faculty is what's gotten me more opportunities.
Mm.
I don't think it's the faculty's opinion or feedback.
No.
I think it's the kids saying, hey, like, we really loved that. We really connected with that. That really helped us. And so, like, again, focus on your product.
Yeah, I would imagine that a lot of your beliefs and ideologies probably go against the grain of what the average teacher thinks, just knowing how they skew politically, and you can probably make these other assumptions, which probably, I don't know if that's right or wrong to do. I just think a lot of times it's true. But yeah, man, the product is what you're delivering to the children, and the DMs and the messages and the encouragement that you're getting from them. I mean, you screenshotted me a couple of the DMs you're getting from these kids, and dude, it was like making me emotional to read it, just thinking about how much you're impacting them and just what that initial spark you're giving them could lead to over the next 5 to 10 years. And it could, dude, you could say one thing, it could change the entire trajectory of a kid's life. And I don't know, man, I couldn't think of a better, just like not burden, but like just a cross to bear to be able to do that, man. It's big time.
Well, the whole thing is this, man. I just want to shorten their learning curve. Like, don't wait till you're 30. You don't have to do that.
You do it now.
Do it at 16. You know, there was a kid, this blew my mind, and we'll wrap it here in a minute, but I want to like talk about like this one kid in particular. Came up to me after the presentation and he's like, hey, I have a question for you. I was like, shoot. You know, I'm thinking he's going to ask about something deep and dark, right? No. He says to me, he's like, I built this marketing agency in 9th grade. And he's like an 11th grader now. And he's like, our revenue is X amount of dollars per month right now. He's like, but like we're trending or we're projected if I keep doing this for the next 3 years, like we're going to be making X amount. And he's like, everyone's telling me I'm an idiot. I have to go to college. He's like, do I need to go to college? And like, there's like teachers and administrators right there. And I'm like, absolutely not. For what? That number that you're talking about that you're projected to make, like he had all the information, like he'd done the work.
He's got the P&L.
He wasn't pulling it out of his rear. Like it was right there in front of me and I'm looking at it. And I'm like, don't let anyone that's never touched this tell you that you should do something that they did or something else. Just stay in this lane.
Yeah.
And he was like, you're the first person that's told me that. Everyone else is like, go to school, you know, get your education. That's great. That's a great path. But not for everyone. And kids just want someone to keep it real with them. That's it. Like what would you tell your kid? If your kid says, Dad, at 19, my business could revenue $1 million. Or I could go to college and then I could make that revenue at 22, 23. Well, I know what I'm telling my kid. Go make the money.
Me too.
Because at 22, 23, you're at 5 million, 7 million.
Yeah.
Like what, you know, but if you stop, you might not ever get that momentum back. That's another thing about like business. When you're in the momentum, like you have to stay in it.
Yeah.
You have to fight to stay in it. You almost need to obsess over it.
Yeah. And the whole purpose of business school is to be molded to someone that can do $1 million in revenue. So if you're already doing that without business school, you're going to learn way more from the real world and getting kicked in the teeth as a founder than you ever will in a classroom reading something out of a textbook and reading theory.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and here's what's hard for grown-ups to understand. Some of these kids are smarter than us.
They are.
So,
Yeah.
you know, just straight up, like you sit down and give an IQ test, they're going to blow your socks off. People struggle with that because they're the adult. It's this authoritative type of mindset. And it's like, I think we should celebrate the fact that they have that gift. Like let them make the world a better place with it versus restricting them. And so I think I wanted to wrap it with that because you don't know what you're going to say that connects with the youth. I didn't talk about building a marketing agency. I talked about the construction company briefly, but they just wanted the opinion of someone that they knew would tell them the truth. So that's why I said, when you're dealing with kids, just tell them the truth, because that's when they're going to open up and ask you questions about things that are really eating at them. And so I wanted to wrap with that because like, I think that's where we're missing, and we missed it in my generation. Like if I ask questions, I got to like, don't talk back.
Yeah.
Like instantly, shut your mouth. We're at the dinner table. Don't talk back. I'm listening to music, whatever it was. And so I had all this pent up in me, and it probably showed out in some pretty bad ways. It's like, let these kids open up. So yeah.
Incredible experience, dude.
Yeah.
Appreciate you sharing that. I think it's going to positively impact a lot of people, man. I feel like you're just chasing the dream, and I can't wait to do a recap of this next week worth of public speaking engagements too.
I'm going to fly you in.
I'd love that.
I got to fly you in.
I got to go to at least one.
I got to fly you in.
It would be so cool.
Yeah. Full circle. For sure. Man, I appreciate you. I love you.
Love you too, man. I'm proud
It's been
of you.
awesome. I'm proud of you. And let's just keep rolling.
Keep rolling, Brave.
All right. 3, 2.